I've been given the go-ahead to start, so I will do so. And I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Terry Lamb. I am president of the Fédération Internationale des Professeurs de Langue Vivante, the International Federation of Language Teacher Associations, and therefore have contacts with many language teachers around the world. Our official address is ECML here in GRAZ, so we have a very close relationship with ECML. And I'm delighted to be invited to take on this role this morning. Thank you very much for that. I've been tasked with doing a summary of yesterday. This is a challenge, I think. It's a challenge to do justice to the rich and varied series of presentations and discussions that we experienced yesterday in 20 minutes. So I think I should start with a health warning. Whatever I say is from my head, and I'm sure that if you were doing this, you would come up with very different things to say, different issues to address. So it's my perspective. But I'd like to offer that to you to reflect on, and in order to help you to develop your own perspectives. I'd also like to apologise in advance to the speakers from yesterday, in case in any way I misrepresent them. I'm not intending to. But what I'd like to do is just provide some comments, some issues around the various components of the conference title. So looking really, I'm going to structure this according to concepts of traditions, challenges, and visions. And reflecting in all of this on the meaning of quality education and of language competencies. I'm not going to do one thing which is a summary and then raise issues for the rest of the day. I'll integrate the questions into what I'm talking about. So I better start. So starting with traditions and really the hold that they have over us, and how these are being challenged. So I'll start with something that I will return to later, and if I run out of time now, I do have another slot at the end of the morning for more reflections, so it could be part B of my summary. But I want to start with something which is about learning generally and language learning more specifically. Henry Widdowson yesterday talked about the accumulation of knowledge and of a range of languages. Clearly, our business is with languages and the ways in which children, adults, people generally learn languages and the languages diet that they're offered in terms of which languages. But I think there was also an awful lot yesterday which was about learning more generally, the accumulation of knowledge, which for me is about how people learn. And I think that what we saw was that we're still grappling with the tradition of learning being something which teachers do to learners. So the teacher-centeredness. And we're all struggling and fighting to find ways of shifting the focus onto learners. And we heard of many excellent examples of that yesterday. But I think that in schools, in classrooms, and I visit many of them, we still have the struggle, for various reasons, of shifting the focus from the teacher to the learner, from teaching to learning. So it's a theme that I'd like to return to later on. We also have an issue of inclusion and the tradition really, which is of monolingualism, monoculturalism, and that in its broader sense, not just people from different backgrounds in terms of migration, but also who belongs in education and children who come from homes where the cultural capital is perhaps different from what education is demanding. And yesterday we saw a film on plurilingualism, and there was a reference in that to the fact that teachers believe very often that German is taught in the German lessons, and versus the idea that all teachers are language teachers. I think there are huge implications for inclusion here, not just inclusion of those who speak another language at home, bring with them another language, another culture into the school, but also anyone struggling with literacy. And the idea of, I think, a subtractive form of bilingualism is still quite prevalent, that children need to leave a language behind in order to learn another one. Traditions reside in beliefs, I think, and we heard this yesterday, and there's a lot of research done into beliefs on teaching and learning. Anita Wendon has described beliefs as tenacious. They're very difficult to change. And I think we do. The things that I've already said are very much about beliefs of the role of the teacher, the role of the learner, the role of other languages in education. And I think I'll move on to challenges in a minute. How do we address teacher beliefs? And the other one, in terms of tradition, is around the meaning of quality. Quality is traditionally measured by a series of narrow variables, measurables, competencies, or Peter Brown's efficacy, expeditiousness, efficiency, or what? What does quality mean? So there's some traditions that have a hold over us. What about the challenges? For me, a major challenge is motivation, and I'll say a few things about motivation. We heard yesterday from Jutta Gehring and other people that English is a challenge for language teachers and language learners. The motivation to learn languages other than English can be problematic in many countries. I meet teachers of French and German from Scandinavian countries and all over the place who say the children don't really want to learn those languages. It's just English. So motivation. But another aspect of motivation is what Jean Ruddock calls the need for connectedness. We yesterday heard, I think it was Frank Hayworth, talked about the need for belonging when talking about spaces. And belonging in the sense of, does my language, does my culture, does my identity belong in this school? Does education generally relate to my life? Well, we heard things around technologies. We heard things around use of mobile technologies from Ishle yesterday. These are things which are part of children's lives. Are they excluded from school or not? And we heard yesterday many compelling arguments why they shouldn't be. Another aspect of motivation that arose yesterday was Richard Clément alluded to something we can call self-determination theory. He talked about fundamental needs in which intrinsic motivation can flourish, the needs of competence, relatedness and autonomy. And actually we heard this from Isabella yesterday, Ortiz, who very clearly made reference to this when she talked about how technology allows learners to work at an appropriate level, to develop choice, autonomy, to offer choice, and to work with others. And it raises the question for me about how much perhaps, we need to look at some of the motivation theories as well as learning theories, again, to inform education and languages education for the 21st century. The challenge of inclusion. Henry Widdowson yesterday said that the main challenge for language education was dealing with diversity. Are there spaces for other languages in the curriculum? Or are they outside the curriculum? And Richard told us yesterday about Canada and how many languages are supported outside the formal education. I mean, I would argue that ideally we need to bring all of the languages into formal education structures, but it's not possible always. I taught for many years in schools. The last school I taught in London, in the late 1980s, there were 40 languages in the school. We couldn't teach 40 languages. So what I did was develop a languages curriculum where the main minority or community languages were taught to all. Everyone learnt Greek and Turkish as well as French and German, and then could choose which they continued with. But also the idea of, and we heard this yesterday, enjoying the diversity, celebrating the linguistic diversity, using the languages that were there in the school and in the classroom as a resource for learning through language awareness type activities across the curriculum. How can we make children feel that their languages and their cultures have a place in the school? And apologies, I keep talking about schools. I'm talking about any sector of education, really. It's just that I work very closely with schools. I think there are also inclusion links to the concept of voice, and voice in various senses. And yesterday, with Snezhana Samajic-Markovic, we heard the links to democratic participation, social justice, equity, human rights, and I would say peace. We talked about the centrality of languages, access to quality education, and that meant, because languages education is central to education, the quality of languages education, to include people, to offer voices. We have a challenge around assessment. Hans-Peter Huber yesterday talked about the need to standardize, to compare, in order to be able to move things on, to understand where people are, where countries are. But how do we understand? How do we understand what Henry Widdowson called the plurality of competencies? If we're talking about plurilingual education or lingual education, if we're moving away from native speaker models, what are the challenges for assessment? How do we represent the variability of contexts and languages? Should we exclusively be talking about language competencies? What about intercultural competencies, learning competencies? How do we measure, should we measure these things? The challenge of challenging assumptions, beliefs, is also very important. I've said something about that already, so I'll move on. But linking with that, we had the question raised yesterday about what do pupils think about change, what do parents think about change, and we'll have the opportunity to hear something about that later. It was Paula Matila from Finland asked about this. How do we, who spend our lives thinking about languages education, how do we bring about change that involves people, that includes people? Should we be talking about changing beliefs? What are the ethical issues around that? And change itself, there seems to be a demand for constant change and improvement. Not in the Enlightenment sense of progress, moving forwards towards something clear, but much more fluid, much more in a shifting sands kind of way, a fluid way, as Zygmunt Bauman talks about, fluid cultures. So even successful systems, Finland we heard yesterday, have to develop and change and learn to keep up with societal and global changes. But are there any constants that we're leaving behind? Are we still bearing in mind learning? Is the changing, constantly changing technology possibly from some people leading to technology driving what we do with learners, driving pedagogy? We heard yesterday that it shouldn't, and that's good. But how many people can keep up with just the technology, let alone thinking around the implications around pedagogy? Pierre Mires talked about the disappointing results in language education despite new approaches and technologies. So are we missing something? So finally, visions. And actually, I thought that when I was putting this together, I'd have far more challenges than visions, but I think there were a few visions yesterday, and I may have to leave the last couple of visions till later on. But I think we need to bear in mind when we're thinking about visions, the other part of the conference title, which is for the 21st century, 21st century society. The world's getting smaller. We've all read and learnt about globalization. And again, with globalization comes rapid change, ideas spread very quickly, knowledge expands, movement, technology is part of that. Super diversity, complexities of diversity. We're doing a lot of work in Sheffield with an area called Page Hall, which was already a very diverse area. A long-standing Pakistani heritage population, 4-5 generations, with various influxes, and now we have Roma coming in from Slovakia, and super diversity. Huge, yes, challenges, but I think enormous opportunities as well. Choice, marketization, these characterize globalization. Culture as a commodity. How do we educate people for this? Shifting employabilities, the need constantly to develop new skills, competition. Which competencies do we need? And we'll come on to that in the next session. And how do we develop them? How do we help people to make informed choices, to be critical, not to have fixed ideas, how to be discerning when faced with lots of information, how to enjoy diversity. And Henry Widdowson yesterday presented a vision of lingualism, capability for languaging, lingual capability, rather than serial approaches to language teaching and learning. And also, rather than separate approaches to teaching and learning different languages by different teachers. And I wonder how this connects to a lot of the current work in the European, in ECML that I've been involved with, work on plurilingual education. I don't see that it's hugely, I think Henry's discussion yesterday, presentation, was fascinating, and I agreed with it. But I also see that it wasn't necessarily something very different from the plurilingual education as I'm understanding it, which is about collaboration between teachers, putting the child, the plurilingual child, at the center of learning, helping the child to draw on all of their plurilingual repertoire, how to understand things in one language by drawing on other languages. I think this is very close to what Henry was talking about yesterday. And apologies if it wasn't Henry, but this was how I was understanding it. I also wonder, I mean, Henry raised the question of how do we put this into practice effectively? Well, perhaps some of the projects that are going on in ECML offer already some responses to that. And we heard also of the approaches in Finland, how the vision of Finland might be helpful. And again, you know, we heard about language awareness, valuing plurilingualism, appreciating cultural diversity, multiple literacies. Sorry, interpreters, I'm starting to go fast. Learning to learn, collaborative learning, learner autonomy, taking responsibility for your own and others' learning, enjoying language diversity, choice, authenticity. All of these words were used yesterday by Paula talking about the vision for Finland. And it leads me on to the concept of cooperation, collaboration, not competition. Pierre, again, Mérès, talked about collaboration. yesterday. How do we build networks? Networks as spaces for shared learning, not conduits where information is just passed from one to another, but networks, including virtual networks. I'm developing at the moment, about to launch an online masters for teachers around the world, which will be completely online. And the challenge is how to create a global learning community of teachers. I think I'm going to come to a conclusion as quickly as I can so that we can move on. But there was a lot of talk yesterday about spaces, and I find that fascinating. How do we create spaces for learning in the physical sense, in the virtual sense, and spaces for thinking? There was a reference to time as space yesterday. And the relationships between spaces and learning. Is there a direct relationship? And if so, is it a chicken or egg question? I tend to agree with Joseph Huber when he talked about what we do with space is what we believe should happen there. And we're back to beliefs. I'd already written down in my notes, can we find we can find new learning approaches in old spaces and old teaching approaches in new spaces. It reminded me of the fact that I visited in England. We have many new built schools. The last government invested huge amounts in creating wonderful schools. And the number of classrooms I go in where PowerPoint's used, and it's back to PowerPoint's replacing the chalk. Very old ways, teacher-centred ways. And it reminds me of my work on flexible learning in the 90s, where I was developing learner autonomy to motivate young learners of French and German. And how I was having to do that in a textiles room with fixed benches and fixed sewing machines. But we managed to develop open learning, flexible learning. Openness. Ulrike Tischler's school yesterday, for me, symbolized openness. It was open. And I think there's something to think about in terms of opening minds through open spaces. We heard offenes lernen. MOOCs has open in there. How do we create spaces where people can breathe and learn? I think there were many, many options yesterday for that, certainly including technology, etc., and the spaces that technology can afford for learning. Teacher education is the key. I agree absolutely with Joseph. Teachers, in order for teachers to develop competencies, if that's what they're doing, how do we address this in terms of teacher education, teacher beliefs? Susanna and Valdemar yesterday, sort of frustratedly asked the question we're always asking, what is the problem? Why is it such a challenge to integrate a range of languages into our classrooms? Well, we do have ways forward, but teacher education's key. And I also think that, and I'll come back to this later on because I've run out of time, but we need to go back to thinking about what learning is and then thinking about what teaching is. But I'll leave it there till later. And that gives me something to say later on as well, which is always good. So thank you very much. We will move on now, and I think I'm now moving from rapporteur to moderator. I should change my tie or something, but I won't. I hope some of that resonated with you, and I hope I didn't misrepresent anything. But it gives us some questions for the rest of the day. And we're going to start. I'm going to invite in a minute various people to come to the stage. Something around language competencies for 21st century, voices from society. And we have a number of people who are representing society sort of outside the mainstream education, different aspects of society. So could I invite people to come up? We have Martina Grötschnig, yeah, who is from the Department of Society and Diversity. What better person to represent society? Obviously, in the regional government of Styria, dealing with the diversity, finding ways of helping it to be a resource, not a problem. We have Bernhard Posch, the head of AVL Academy, who I'm not saying you have to represent, but certainly is giving the voice of business, industry, commerce. AVL Academy is they make engines, as far as I can understand, and it'll be very interesting to understand what his perceptions are of what quality education means and what are the competencies, the needs of employers, the future and the language needs. Then we have Lea Renoldner. Is Lea here? Yeah, hello. Who is representative of the European Youth Forum, part of the Council of Europe. And so we're hearing the voices of youth and learners, which is very important. My research is mostly focused on learners' voices, and I think voice is incredibly important. Learners, we need to listen, we can learn so much. And then we have Johannes Theiner, from the European Parents Association, former president of the European Parents Association, and also a member of the ECML's professional network forum, who will provide us with some insights into the voice of parents. Yeah. So could I ask you to join me up here, please? I'm feeling lonely. Wherever you like. In the program, you will see that there was also meant to be a video message from Brigitte Jank, who's an education spokesperson in Parliament and head of Chamber of Commerce. Unfortunately, that video has not found its way through to us. So, challenges of technology, again, perhaps, or challenges of time, who knows, space. Okay, hello. Now, we have, I was given express permission to overrun by 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah? Does that permission still? Yeah, okay. Because obviously we have 4 people here to offer their insights into 21st century learning needs, competencies, etc. And also it'd be really good to involve some discussion. So I'm going to ask each of you to say something, a short perspective, and then we'll open things up. We'll see if there are any immediate questions, but I think it's important that we give you all time to say something and that other people have time for some questions or perceptions as well. Okay? Should we start with Martina, because you're first on the program? So could you tell us, please, what, from your perspective, from the Department of Society, Diversity, what are the competencies?
First, thank you very much for inviting to this conference. And I heard it's possible to speak in German, and it's possible to translate because my English is not so very good. It's horrible for such a conference with a high potential. People here, thanks a lot. And the Styria, das Land Steiermark, it's possible in German?
Okay. Natürlich, ja.
Thank you. Das Land Steiermark, das ich hier vertreten darf, sozusagen ist in der Charta des Zusammenlebens, hat beschlossen und auch strategische Ziele gesetzt, um der Tatsache, dass Gesellschaft in all ihrer Vielfalt sozusagen auch entsprochen werden soll, zahlreiche Maßnahmen gesetzt. Und ich freue mich, heute hier auf dieser Konferenz einen kurzen Einblick zu geben. Das Land Steiermark, insbesondere die Fachabteilung, die ich hier vertreten darf für Gesellschaft und Diversität, möchte mit ihren zuständigen Ressorts Bildung, for Education und Ressort Integration und Diversity Maßnahmen setzen, die insbesondere auch auf Sprache, sprachliche Bildung und auch die Mehrsprachigkeit und ihre große Bedeutung in der heutigen Gesellschaft fokussiert. Und ein zentrales Element ist die 2010 beschlossene Charta des Zusammenlebens in Vielfalt, die davon ausgeht, dass Vielfalt eine Tatsache ist und vor allem auch die bereits von Ihnen erwähnten Chancen trotz der Herausforderungen im Fokus hat und vor allem den Blick auf die Ressourcen, auch die Ressourcen der sprachlichen Vielfalt, der Mehrsprachigkeit. Und hier möchte das Land Steiermark selbst sozusagen Akteur dieser Vielfalt sein und auf diese Vielfalt reagieren. Die Zielgruppe der steirischen Bevölkerung, der Menschen, die hier leben, soll auch in den Ressourcen angesprochen werden. Und das zeigt sich in Grundsetzungen, Haltungen, in Prinzipien, die zum Beispiel auch sich ausdrücken durch mehrsprachige Materialien, Broschüren, Barrierefreiheit auch im Hinblick auf Homepage, mehrsprachige Homepages. Und das Land Steiermark, insbesondere das Integrationsressort, setzt hier einen verstärkten Fokus auf Mehrsprachigkeit und setzt hier Maßnahmen, Projekte, insbesondere mit Schulen, mit der Zielgruppe der Kinder und Jugendlichen, aber auch in der Adult Education, in der Erwachsenenbildung, hier Programme zu setzen, die insbesondere in der Basisbildung hier auch Maßnahmen setzt, wenn es um die Mehrsprachigkeit geht oder auch um Maßnahmen zur Erlangung von Deutschkenntnissen. Und im Zusammenhang mit diesem Blick auf Vielfalt, Diversity, auch diese Unterscheidung zu treffen, dass es oft, wenn es um das Thema Migration, Menschen mit Migrationshintergrund geht, kulturelle Fragen, dass es hier in erster Linie oft um Deutschkenntnisse geht oder um sprachliche Kenntnisse und dass es nicht eine Kulturfrage ist. Und hier diese Unterscheidung zu treffen im Sinne des Diversity ist ein wichtiger Zugang, dass Menschen hier sich gut einleben und auch gut hier leben können und dass es eher Maßnahmen braucht, dass Menschen die deutsche Sprache erlernen können, aber auch die Vielfalt der Sprache anzuerkennen und hier auch in den Schulen, in den Bildungseinrichtungen von Anfang an, auch in Kindergärten, in schulnahen Einrichtungen, in Jugendzentren, in allen Zentren, die für Familien da sind, in der Region, auch draußen, hier Unterstützungsangebote und auch diese gelebte Vielfalt zu verdeutlichen. Und hier gibt es Projekte wie zum Beispiel Zusammen lernen, zusammen reden, wo gemeinsam mit dem System Schule, Kindergarten, mit dem Lehrkörper, mit den Lehrerinnen und Lehrern, mit den Schülerinnen und Schülern und aber auch den Eltern, außerschulischen Einrichtungen, Jugendbetreuern und Betreuerinnen gemeinsam versucht wird, hier ein sprachenfreundliches Umfeld, Sie haben es auch vorhin erwähnt, zu leben, zu installieren und hier auch ein Bewusstsein zu schaffen, dass Sprachenvielfalt Freude machen kann, dass man seine eigene Sprache sozusagen auch freudig leben kann, fördern kann, Lust auf Sprache zu machen und dass es eine Kompetenz darstellt. Und dass Deutsch zwar die allgemeine Sprache ist der Verständigung, wenn man hier lebt, aber dass trotzdem auch die Vielfalt der Sprachen sichtbar werden soll.
Super, danke. Danke. Okay. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Ich glaube, was mir am besten gefällt, ist das Wort Zusammenlernen. Ja? Und das für mich heißt, dass also Sprachkompetenzen oder Lernkompetenzen nicht nur für die Minderheiten sind, nicht nur für die Plurilingualen, sondern für alle. Und das also sehr deutlich da drinnen. Danke. Okay, can we move on perhaps to the world of engines? Yeah. Yeah. I'm being very careful about what I say when I introduce because I just have a very vague understanding that engines are involved, so I don't want to put my foot in it.
You are not the only one. So, hello, good morning. My name is Bernard Posch. I'm representing a well-known company in GRAZ and also in the automotive industry. So I'm not particularly sure if I'm representing all the middle-sized enterprises that are very common in Europe, but parts hopefully also apply to everyone. Now, I'm not going to market our company, but to understand what I'm saying, I have to say a few words about our company. So, we are a global company. We have about 3,000 people working in GRAZ, about 4,000 people working in 40 what we call affiliates, meaning locations all over the world: Korea, Japan, China, all European nations, North America, South America. And yes, we do develop engines, but not only the diesel engine or the combustion engine, but we are now in the direction of new technologies, meaning everything that can move a car is of interest of us, or everything that can move a vehicle is of interest to us, so electricity, battery, hybrid, all these things. Interestingly enough, we also do not a lot, only a lot of testing, so meaning that we are sending people on tracks, maybe also in the desert, but we do also a lot of simulation, meaning so we are a little bit of a software company as well. Yeah? And now turning a little bit to the educational language part. Now, AVL is probably one of the few companies, not the only one, thanks God, that affords something like an AVL Academy, meaning training and gathering of know-how is really at the core of our business, yeah? Because we have about 70% engineers, highly educated people in our workforce, and let's put it this way: if they are not trained, they get actually a little bit grumpy, yeah? and are not motivated anymore. Yeah? So we really need this kind of training. And also, interestingly enough, we are not only doing technical training, but we probably were one of the very first companies also that understood that social, personal competences, general competences are really important to be successful in business. And therefore, our skill sets are also, you probably know, a competency-based approach is that in our AVL Academy, we are not only training thermodynamics and acoustics and things like this, but we deal a lot with communication, because we know that communication is really at the core of being successful. Now English, of course, is our lingua franca, and so we use a lot of English, and everybody more or less is motivated, not to say forced, to speak English. Our big boss, Professor List, always says, if there's only one person in a room who does not understand German, and we are an Austrian-based company, yeah, then we have to speak English, yeah? Because everybody should understand everything. So therefore English, of course, is one of the main languages we are trying to convey, to teach various methods. And not for nothing I have mentioned that we do a lot in technologies and simulation, but interesting statement maybe for you. Many of our people, if it is about language learning, they prefer to have it still face-to-face. Yeah? So when we offer web-based trainings and video streamings and all these things, they say, Mr. Bosch, that's great, but can I have a face-to-face training? That's much more interesting for me. So maybe for English, one more sentence, because you mentioned this. We also do not only concentrate on English, but we are quite interested that, of course, the people who work in GRAZ, and we have a workforce of about 15% of people in GRAZ who are not from Austria, but from somewhere else, that they learn German. And we do actually, via German, a lot of integration. This means that we also invite the families of our engineers to join in our language courses. And so this is important, and outside I read something interesting, that if you speak the language of the people in the country, then you go to their heart. And this is also what we want in our business, and therefore we really motivate also people who work as project managers in China or Korea to learn a little bit of the language there as well. So we do courses there as well, intercultural, connected with intercultural competence. So I stop here. Many more things to say, but okay. I hope I could convey a little bit the idea of our company. Yeah?
Thank you very much. Thanks. Yes, you certainly did. And I think the reference to personal, social competencies, intercultural competencies, as well as the specific language, English, German, very, very important when we're thinking about competencies and how language competencies and general competencies interrelate. So thank you very much for that. It's quite interesting, actually, in the UK, certainly in London, but other cities, where you have multinational companies moving their headquarters to London because they can also draw on the diverse languages that are present within the city. So, you know, if you want people that can speak Arabic and Urdu and Chinese and Japanese and all of these, then there's a huge resource within the city. So, you know, that's a different context because that's England, but certainly, you know, the resources here for business would be quite interesting to think about in terms of the different languages and how they offer possibilities. I'm just going to continue like this and then open the floor just to try and keep things a little bit tight. And I'm going to ask Leah now, please, to say something about, you know, what your perception is and whether there are discussions in the Youth Forum around what it means to be a learner in the 21st century.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start off with a little story to sort of set the scene of why, hopefully, someone had the good idea to invite the youth perspective over. I grew up in Vienna. I was raised by a single mother as an only child, and I grew up in one of those, in PC you would call it socially diverse neighborhoods, also in a very large school with over 1,000 kids and not the best reputation. So basically I was, by the statistics, set up for failure, if you want to call it, but set up for like a bit more of a struggle than other kids would have. And I've been one of the extremely lucky ones, I need to say that. And I shouldn't. I also really need to emphasize that I shouldn't be that, I shouldn't use that word lucky, or shouldn't need to use that word lucky, but I still feel very lucky, just for the reason that I had an incredible mother who knew that education was the only path she would actually push for me. I was free to do whatever I wanted in the world as long as it involved a degree. Let's say it that way. Because she had never had the chance to graduate from high school. And I never even questioned that until I was 22, I think. But then I went to high school, and I was lucky enough again to have wonderful, wonderful teachers in a school that was not equipped with many of those. But I was really in that really very small classroom, because we were just a few kids, because we had Latin and no one else took Latin. It was just the ones that didn't think they were cut out for math that took Latin, and I thought I was one of those kids. So it was me again with, okay, let's do Latin, and up until this day I can only count in Latin, like Latin numbers, for the reason that I learned it in math again. But anyway, so I would be in this classroom with this incredible teacher, and teachers, plural, and many years after I graduated high school, my former physics teacher had gave me a call and said, I have a favor to ask you. Would you mind coming back to school for a day? Because I have a group of kids, lots of girls involved, just like it was in your class. Again, a Latin class. And there are a few kids who are interested in science. And I know you were always a science buff and whatever, because I was striving towards studying physics afterwards, but eventually I didn't. It's a completely different story. But she said, yeah, you and some other kids from your class should come and sort of tell them what's possible, that girls can make it in the STEM field. And it was that discussion. I said, okay, sure, fine. And then we were talking to those, let's say, 20 girls, and they asked us what was really important to us, like in retrospect, what do we need to do in order to succeed? And I said, and to succeed in the STEM field, that was the question. And I said, learn English and learn German. And then they really looked at me completely baffled and making me explain what I meant. And I said, first of all, if you can't spell in your own language or in your mother tongue, that's it. No matter what you do, whether you do humanities or whatever, it will disqualify you immediately, in the job market at least. And secondly, if you don't know English, and not English as an additional sort of feature that sets you above the others, but English on a level that is like reading and knowing how to read and knowing how to write is that basic of a skill nowadays. You're really set up for a hell lot of trouble eventually, no matter what you do, but especially also in science, because you will see that 90% of what you do will happen in English, and it will not happen in excuse me, where's the train station English, but it will happen on a very sophisticated level. And only in high school do you have the chance to be submersed in this field where you really have a teacher you can ask again and again and again and again, and really try to make them teach you, even though they might not be the best teachers, they might not have the fanciest, newest skills or technology, but it's the one place where you can actually ask as many questions and no one will frown upon you, or at least not supposed to frown upon you. And not only for this like job market out there, far in the distant future when you're 14 and trying to decide what you're going to do with your life, because if you had asked me at 14, I would be sitting in a lab right now with my physics hat on and studying something about really important scientific stuff. And eventually I'm sitting here talking about languages, and I'm a researcher indeed, but I do economic history nowadays. So not really the path I was cut out for initially. But then again,
bad for us.
Well, I'm trying.
No. You're looking always for engineers and scientists.
I was very close, but then again, I study now these fields. Anyway, what I want to say is that not only is English and German and any other language sort of something that is not an asset anymore, it's a basic skill that you need to profess. And this is something that so many young people do not understand. And secondly, it opens up a world that you will, as a young person in general, not really be able to imagine at first. My life, the life that I lead, and this is especially my social life, my private life, would never have been possible the way it is right now and the way I like it and the way I enjoy it if it hadn't been for a certain proficiency in English and in German as well. Meaning that I have friends from all over the world. My volunteering experience within the Youth Forum, within the Advisory Council on Youth of the Council of Europe is simply absolutely impossible without being able to understand complex texts, complex analysis of language, or like the subtle tones that are on the political level going on when conversing with each other. So I have a hard time explaining it sometimes to young people, because for me it's so like straightforward. It just happened to me somehow. I was lucky in primary school, I was lucky in high school, I was lucky with my mother. And it's sort of like, I was just on a good roll, let's say it that way. But I see with some friends of mine who had not been that lucky to begin with, that they really struggle now. And when I think about like my son, who was in the back yesterday and is going to join us later on again, I really have a difficult time imagining him just growing up until he's 6, 7, 8 without knowing any English, because I just live such a big part of my life in a different language, not only one, but also my husband in French and I sometimes in Italian, that I don't want him to be excluded from that world. So, and as much as I know that, of course, you shouldn't over-challenge your kids by teaching them English at like a toddler age, I really have sort of a tendency to think, maybe I should try anyway, because then he can like talk to me and my friends when I talk to them. He would not stand there not knowing what to do, what to say, while at the same time I don't want to be one of those like, my kid needs to go to the best high school in town or whatever parent. But I just understand that the importance of languages in the last 30 years, from when I was born and from when he was Born has completely changed, especially in a place that we are right now. In Austria, you grow up speaking German, and you see German and hear German on TV and on the radio and wherever you go. But then again, this is not really the life we lead nowadays, and maybe not even the one we should lead. So I leave it at that for the moment, and I'm open for questions afterwards.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. That's very thought-provoking, as always. I mean, you know, we hear resonances of what we were saying about progress and development, that it's not about long-term, it's about affordances, it's about things that happen in your life that lead to you being excited and motivating. I love the story of, making the teacher teach me. I mean, there's the essence of motivation. Thank you very much. Thanks. And also those, the sense of the importance of your experiences. And although you focused on German and English, suddenly the French came out and the Italian came out and all of those things. So thank you. Thanks very much. I'm going to pass to Johannes. If you could say a few things from the parents' perspective.
Thank you very much. Probably you should take the role, as you unveiled that you're a parent already, and you gave me a wonderful proof of what we always claim. You should never forget that it is the belief of parents with sometimes a rather simple and little educated background that opens the doors for the children, something that all international statistics reveal, but sort out to the side way of let's assign it alongside the socioeconomic status and don't talk about how to influence that and learn more. And it's more. It's much more. I will probably mix a little bit languages because we have had one German contribution to English, and I cannot say everything in proper German that I can say in English because our motto, our core belief is an English sentence that has to be translated in a very specific way, and I will not trust the translators with that. The European Parents Association is a volunteer network of parents representatives from various backgrounds, from various fields, from different countries, of course, European countries, which spread out to Israel just recently, which is a big step to see the bigger share of Europe, like the Council of Europe also does. And the core belief is parents are the primary educators. And now let me translate to German. Eltern sind nicht nur die Ersten, sondern die Hervorragenden, müsste man das übersetzen. Und Educators möchte ich auch nicht auf Deutsch übersetzen, weil Erzieher klingt im Deutschen ganz furchtbar. Rohrstab und an den Ohren ziehen, müssen wir ein anderes Wort finden. Eltern sind sicherlich die Ersten, so wie du mit deinem Kind über die Sprache dir überlegst. Das sind die wesentlichsten Weichenstellungen in das Leben. Eltern sind möglicherweise die Besten auf dem Lernweg ihrer Kinder. Wir nennen das Learning Provider, das kann man wieder nicht gut auf Deutsch übersetzen. Wir bieten Lernräume, Motivation, Unterstützung, der Lehrer als Coach, das muss man alles auch jetzt auf die Eltern übertragen. Pädagogische Begleiter, wie immer wir das jetzt übersetzen. Sie sind jedenfalls diejenigen, die die stärksten Einflüsse auf den Lernweg, und zwar den lebenslangen Lernweg der nächsten Generation haben. So muss man das vollständig übersetzen. Primary, the first and most impacting, um es wieder zurück ins Englische zu bringen. Das bedeutet, dass Eltern in allen Bereichen des Lernens auch einen Platz haben. Und ich möchte jetzt ganz bewusst aus dem Bereich des Formalen auch wieder aufbrechen. Terry hat gesagt, wir sollten uns alles im Formalen ansiedeln, was wichtig ist. Das mag gut sein, aber viele der Gesetzmäßigkeiten des schulischen, des formalen Lernens sind zu eng und geben auch nicht den Raum, voranzuschreiten. Peter Brown used the word inertia yesterday and described this kind of skeptical attitude in the pedagogic active generation of parents and teachers that are a little bit skeptical in moving forward, in taking the step of enterprise, getting into a new space, using the word space also in a very wide sense, and trying something new. which is, of course, what we expect the learner to do, to step into some new open. And of course, the educator, the learning provider, should be able to safeguard this step into the open. But sometimes he or she should also very consciously take a step into the new, which is, with all these IT challenges, a natural demand, which is not taken in that way. So the parents are delivering informal learning to their children. The parents are partners, not customers in the formal system. That's a very, very important distinction. If you're a customer, you're just calling for services, and there is no notion of shared responsibility. And there is a lot of very good examples. Sometimes they are, like in Ireland, in the constitution of the whole school approach, where the whole family and the parents are taken into the boat, are taken as responsible partners. And we have a very good basic outline in the Austrian school legislation that takes not only the parents but also the learners as responsible partners in what we call school partnership. It doesn't work always that nice, but it's a very, very good concept. So this makes it a field of negotiation, of discussion, of meeting, of seeing the diversity of needs and competences that may come together, and this needs to extend the scope of the formal system. And what is not the least important thing, and it's very much in line of a forgotten approach of the European qualification framework that talked about the 3 columns, the non-formal sector that I have not mentioned yet, which gives a lot of opportunities to the parent generation to take them back onto a learning pathway, which can be very, very fruitful for managing this kind of challenges of diversity with little educated, or at least not knowing the national language and the national culture. Schools are very, very good, extraordinary places, let's say, because they have this attitude around the building already, that you can learn something here, though parents sometimes don't dare to step over the front door. So there is a lot of perspectives, and I think I should probably stop there and close with a very big claim. When we talk about quality, don't only look at learning outcomes in the restricted form of simple benchmarking tests. Give a lot of attendance to what the learners experience and how the pathway of learning could be assessed. What learners see as a motivating part, what they are having as a question, not only in the motivation, but why, what could we learn to go more into this or that direction? So the CLIL concept with having science, for example, as something where you can really open doors, get into reading of some stuff that you have not available in German. We have a very different didactics. I'm a scientist myself. Different didactics in the Anglo-Saxon work. So there is a lot of things to gain. Languages really are a platform where you can move and bring together a lot, but it needs to overcome this inertia, to come together and to look not only at the outcome and not trust the systems, but the acting persons and their individuality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Johannes. Thank you. You reminded me actually of something that I did miss out of my summary earlier when I was talking about inclusion in formal spaces, because I also meant to refer to an excellent policy development about 8 or 9 years ago, which was called the Our Languages Project in England, which was about collaboration, cooperation between the informal learning spaces of the supplementary schools and also the formal spaces. And the point for me was that we need to be aware of the learning that goes on outside the classroom as well, and how can we bring that? So I agree with you about the whole issue of assessment and opening that up. But I said enough. Do we have a little bit of time for a few comments, please? Would anyone like to ask a question or say something, offer some observation? Vous n'êtes pas encore trop fatigué, j'espère. On attend le café, mais... No? Yes, we have someone at the back. Do we have a microphone, please? Sorry. There's one here, actually. There's a microphone just here, so we need it for the interpreters.
Das ist das Problem.
Yeah.
Das lernt man bei so viel.
Okay. It's working? Yes. Just one question for Leah Reynoldner. Did I understand you rightly when you said spelling is one of the limits that cannot be done without? Did you say that?
I did say that.
Yeah, because I just want to observe, or I have observed that there are people who have difficulty in spelling but have great capacities otherwise that society should not be made to do without.
I'm certainly not questioning their speaking abilities or understanding ability, whatever, but one just needs to meet the fact that if you cannot set up a proper letter, or at least a cover letter for yourself when you apply for a job that is without any spelling mistakes, you're in trouble, because if you have the choice between 3 people and one of them is unable to spell even the cover letter in an email, you will not trust them to be able to write a flawless letter to a customer, to a client. So it's just a tiny element in some respects, and it's of course just used in certain moments in life, but if you need it, it really is very important, and one should not be fooled to think that you can do without it.
Yeah, just some people have to do without it.
Absolutely, and I'm not questioning that.
Yeah.
I also, like, of course, everyone makes spelling mistakes, but in the long run, you need to at least focus when you have to and be able to overcome those obstacles. And if it is using a spell check or asking someone else, but usually there will be some moments in life when it really comes in very handy if you know how to spell correctly.
Thank you. Thanks. Any other comments? Yes?
Ja, hallo, Steiner Nübeler, ich komme aus Norwegen. Ich habe eigentlich einen Kommentar, und zwar versucht man in Norwegen dafür zu motivieren, junge Leute zu motivieren, dass sie zusätzlich zum Englischen auch eine zweite Fremdsprache lernen sollen. Wir brauchen die jungen Leute gar nicht zu motivieren, Englisch zu lernen. Das geht von alleine. Die norwegischen Arbeitgeberverbände behaupten, wir sollten Deutsch lernen. Und wenn ich Sie jetzt höre, frage ich mich selbstverständlich, ob das so stimmt. Ihre Firmensprache ist Englisch. Und wenn ich jetzt dann zurückgehe nach Norwegen und sage, ja, so in Graz spricht man Englisch und nicht Deutsch, wie soll ich dann meine Leute motivieren?
Danke, Steiner.
Also ich glaube, die Frage gilt mir. Ne? Wir haben 2 Firmensprachen. Ne? Und ich habe das ja indirekt angedeutet. Jetzt spreche ich Deutsch, ja, übrigens. Ja. Englisch ist für uns einfach natürlich die Lingua franca, weil Fakt ist, dass wir unsere Projekte in multikulturellen Teams machen, ja, weil auch unsere Kunden global aufgestellt sind, und deswegen haben wir gar keine andere Chance. In Graz reden wir aber sehr wohl Deutsch, ja, und auch unsere Firmenkommunikation ist eher in Graz sogar Deutsch, manchmal auch zweisprachig. Da gibt es auch durchaus unterschiedliche Auffassungen am Standort. Ja. Also da gibt es auch Diskussionen darüber, ob wir manchmal nicht auch in Österreich oder in Graz speziell das Englische bisschen zu überbetonen. Also da gibt es durchaus Auffassungsunterschiede, aber ich kann Ihnen also definitiv sagen, in Graz sprechen wir, wenn immer es geht, Deutsch. Und wenn es eben nicht geht, so wie ich es vorher auch gesagt habe, dann in Englisch. Und was ich auch gesagt habe, ist, wir legen großen Wert darauf, dass die Leute, die zu uns kommen und über einen längeren Zeitraum bei uns arbeiten, auch wirklich Deutsch lernen und auch die Familien Deutsch lernen. Das heißt, wir sehen das schon als einen ganz, ganz wichtigen Integrationsfaktor an. Und ansonsten möchte ich mich nicht weiter veräußern darüber, ob jetzt Deutsch, Englisch, Französisch oder was auch immer die Leading Language sein soll, ja? Weil da würde ich nur in Nesseln treten. Ich hoffe, die Antwort war ausreichend für Sie.
Okay, Johannes.
I'm tempted to add something to widen again the view on why to learn languages. Because there is more, and the policies on multilingualism dig deeper or take their roots from deeper. I've been in Malta. Maltese is an extremely fascinating language. I'm not a linguist, but still it reached me, this message of having a kind of a melting pot in the midst of the Mediterranean that melts Arabic to Romanic languages. There is a number of 350,000 speakers. They have no more elaborate literacy in science and math. A lot of the upper class sends their children to English school, primary schools, so they learn in the playground, they learn the Maltese. The understanding of the unique history and position of Malta is somehow kind of stamped into this language. Or when you go to Luxembourg, a language that the German speaker can quite nicely understand. And when I said Guten Abend to welcome a meeting, it was an applause, because they are not used to be taken serious as and that's not something that links to nationalism. It's really to honor the local colors and flavors of one of these spots in Europe that is so rich in diversity, in culture, in things that may in the Alpine area be different 5 kilometers further away. And one of the things that I have to conclude is that the formal curricula, the ways of delivering sounds very technical. So as if you could really educate, like imprinting something, we really need to find other ways of, let's say, joyful, the word was used yesterday, attractive, dropping into a new language, this immersive experience of that it has a sound, that it has a special meta-level quality. And I think this is what starting with a curriculum and a benchmark at the end, is sometimes really hindering that we give, and probably that's what lingualism could be in the real world.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to add a final word?
I think the question of qualification is a fact, you told it, but the concentration of the Multilingualism oder Mehrsprachigkeit ist eine Frage der question of identity. It's very central, and you told it, that we try to say families that they have to, or to tell with their children in their own language, yeah? And because it's a question of identity, and die Wertschätzung der Erstsprache, wenn es ums Vorlesen geht, das Thema, was auch in Deutsch sozusagen immer wieder Thema ist, es wird zu wenig gelesen, und Literacy als Grundkompetenz, auch hier auch den Wert zu legen, dass die Bilderbücher, Bücher vorlesen, Geschichten erzählen in der Familie als Primary Educator, sozusagen auch in den Erstsprachen passiert, da geht es auch um Emotion. Ja? Und ich denke, hier eine Identitätsbildung zu machen, Qualifikation so als Fact, ja, das ist ein wichtiger, zentraler Punkt. Aber hier geht es darum, Emotionen zu transportieren und hier eine Identität zu bilden in dieser Mehrsprachigkeit auch und in dieser Erstsprache ist ganz ein zentrales Element, wenn es um diesen Ressourcenblick geht. Und das war auch gemeint mit dieser Haltung, die die Charta vermitteln möchte in der Steiermark, hier neugierig zu sein, Individuen anzusprechen, egal in welcher Sprache. Und dann diese Freude durch die Sprachenvielfalt zu erleben, dann ist es egal, welche Sprache eben, ob Englisch bei AVL oder woanders, aber es geht um dieses Begegnen und dieses Wertschätzen der eigenen Sprache, Erstsprache, Muttersprache. Und Sie haben auch angesprochen, diese Erziehungs- und Bildungspartnerschaft als zentrales Element, dass man hier sich auf Augenhöhe begegnet und wenn es in elementaren oder schulischen Bildungssystemen hier um Unterstützungspersonen geht, die eine Dolmetschfunktion übernehmen, aber auch sozusagen die Personen in ihrer Kompetenz ansprechen, diesen Empowerment-Ansatz, dass sie was können, ja, also nicht nur zu sagen, du musst und das braucht's, sondern wirklich, sie haben ja schon etwas, sie sind Expertinnen und Experten für ihre Lebenswelt, nicht nur für ihre Sprache, sondern auch für ihre Kultur und dann bin ich motiviert und von sich aus motiviert, neue Sprachräume, Entwicklungsräume, Kulturräume kennenzulernen, aber nicht sozusagen mit dem erhobenen Zeigefinger, das ist uns wichtig auch zu vermitteln.
Vielen Dank, danke. Okay, well, I think it's just about time for coffee. I'd just like to say many, many thanks for all of your contributions and also from the audience. The last 5 minutes there made me think about the question of motivation. So I'd just like to finish with one little story, which is about motivating children in England, monolingual English-speaking children in England to learn other languages, which, as you can imagine, is a challenge because they think everyone speaks English, so why do I need to bother? And so one strategy that I did adopt was to ask them which languages they thought were important. And from that, I told you earlier that I developed a curriculum in which everyone learned some Greek and some Turkish, which were the main languages spoken in those schools. Many children chose to continue with those which they'd had tasters of as their first foreign language. Many of those children did a very unusual thing, which was to pick up a second foreign language after that. And when I asked them why, when I did some research, they said, well, you know, what's French and German got to do with my life? But actually, where I live, I hear Greek and I hear Turkish and I see it around me. It's the here and now that you were talking about, Leah, rather than the long term. But what it was some kind of opening of the minds to the fact that languages are about communication and culture. And that was a very important learning piece of learning for me as the teacher in terms of how we motivate and how we offer opportunities to be motivated. Coffee calls. Enjoy the break. We will be starting probably slightly later, but then we're going to move on and Sarah's in charge and we're looking at how we develop the language competencies. So enjoy your coffee. Many thanks.